You wake up, you check your phone, and you see that your checking account balance is somehow lower than it was a couple of days ago, even though you feel like you haven't really done anything extravagant. You're not buying designer clothes or taking luxury vacations. You're just, existing. Paying for groceries that seem to get more expensive every single week, filling up your car with gas, paying the internet bill, maybe grabbing a coffee because you're exhausted. And you sit there looking at the screen, and you just feel this quiet, heavy frustration because you realize you're doing everything right. You have a job, you're paying your bills, you're not drowning in credit card debt, and yet, you just don't feel like you're getting ahead. You're running on a financial treadmill that is slowly, subtly tilting upward, and you're just trying not to slide off the back. My name is Zach, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, human psychology, and why some people seem to glide through financial challenges while others are constantly stressed about their bank account balance. And honestly, the more I dig into this stuff, the more I realize that the stress most Americans are feeling right now isn't actually their fault. It's not a moral failing. It's not because you're bad with money or because you don't work hard enough. It's because we are living through one of the most bizarre, manipulated, and frankly, unprecedented economic transitions in modern history, and nobody is really explaining it to us in plain English. But here's the thing that kept me up at night when I first started putting the pieces together. This exact environment, the one that feels like it's squeezing the life out of the middle class right now, is actually setting up what might be the biggest, most obvious wealth-building opportunity of the next decade for regular, everyday Americans. If you understand the underlying mechanics of what's actually happening to our money, and more importantly, where the money is trying to go, your entire perspective on the next 10 years is going to shift. You'll stop feeling like a victim of the economy and start realizing where the leverage points actually are. Let's get into it. I want to start by talking about something that sounds incredibly boring but is actually the key to everything: the macroeconomic backdrop. You hear people throw around terms like inflation and interest rates on the news all the time, and honestly, our brains just kind of glaze over, right? It feels like background noise. But I need you to look at what happened over the last few years from a completely different angle. Think back to 2020. The world panicked. The government essentially hit the pause button on the economy, and to keep the whole system from collapsing, they did something that had never really been done at that scale. They just started creating money out of thin air. Trillions of dollars. And they sent it to us in the form of stimulus checks, they sent it to businesses in the form of PPP loans, and they basically just flooded the system with cash. Now, what happens when you suddenly have a whole lot more dollars chasing the exact same amount of goods and services? You guessed it. The price of everything goes up. We all felt it. But here's the part that really messes with people. The government then realized, oh no, we created too much inflation, we have to fix this. So what do? They raise interest rates. They make it incredibly expensive to borrow money. And this is where the squeeze happens. You see, the American economy is largely built on the idea of cheap debt. We buy homes with cheap debt. We buy cars with cheap debt. Small businesses expand using cheap debt. When you suddenly make borrowing money expensive, everything freezes. People stop buying houses because a 7% or 8% mortgage is terrifying. Businesses stop expanding because it costs too much to borrow. And so, the economy slows down, people get laid off, and you end up in this weird twilight zone where things are still expensive at the grocery store, but nobody has any job security. I was talking to a buddy of mine last week who works in middle management at a logistics company. Good job, makes decent money. And he told me, Zach, I feel like I'm holding a ticking time bomb. I'm making more money than I ever have, but after taxes, my 401k contribution, and my mortgage, I have less discretionary income than I did when I was making 40 grand out of college. And he's not alone. That is the quintessential American experience right now. But why does this matter for a wealth opportunity? Because when the Federal Reserve raises rates this high, this fast, it doesn't just slow down the economy. It completely shatters the way traditional wealth has been built in this country for the last 15 years. Let me explain what I mean by that. From roughly 2009 to 2022, we lived in a magical fairy tale world of 0% interest rates. If you had any money at all, you could borrow it for practically nothing. What did that do? It blew up the price of every asset known to man. Stocks went to the moon. Real estate went to the moon. Crypto went to the moon. If you just bought a house with a 3% interest rate and sat on your couch for 3 years, you made more money than a brain surgeon did working 80-hour weeks. It was insane. But that era is dead. We are not going back to 3% mortgages anytime soon. The music stopped, and a lot of people are left standing around wondering what to do next. If you're trying to build wealth today using the 2015 playbook, just buy a generic index fund, buy whatever house you can afford, and wait, you are going to be incredibly frustrated. The tailwinds have turned into headwinds. So, where is the opportunity? If the old playbook is dead, what's the new one? The first massive shift you need to understand is the transition from financial assets to hard assets. Let me break that down simply. Financial assets are things like stocks, bonds, and cash. They are essentially promises. A stock is a promise that you own a piece of a company's future profits. Cash is a promise from the government that it has value. But in a high-inflation, high-interest rate environment, promises get devalued. Hard assets, on the other hand, are real, tangible things. Real estate, energy, certain types of infrastructure, commodities, things that people absolutely need to survive, regardless of what the Federal Reserve does. When the cost of money goes up, the cost of everything goes up, but the things that people cannot live without, shelter, power, food, retain their value because the demand for them is inelastic. You can decide not to buy a new iPhone because money is tight. You cannot decide not to heat your house in the winter. Now, I know what you're thinking. Zach, real estate is insanely expensive right now, and I can't afford a 7% mortgage. And you're right. The single-family home market in the suburbs is incredibly tough for a first-time buyer right now. But that's because everyone is staring at the exact same board on the Monopoly game. Everyone wants the same little greenhouse. The opportunity in real estate over the next decade isn't going to be buying a nice house with a white picket fence and hoping it goes up 5% a year. The opportunity is in necessity-based real estate. Multifamily housing, affordable housing, industrial real estate, the warehouses and distribution centers that keep Amazon and Walmart running. Think about it logically. We have a massive housing shortage in this country. We have millions of young people hitting their prime renting and buying years. And we have local governments that have made it almost illegal to build new single-family homes due to zoning laws. What happens when you have massive demand and restricted supply? Prices go through the roof. So, while the average person is stressing over how they're going to afford a 3-bedroom house, the people who are building wealth are figuring out how to own a piece of the apartment complexes that the average person is being forced to rent in. You don't have to go out and buy a $20 million apartment complex yourself. There are private real estate funds, REITs, real estate investment trusts, and syndications that allow everyday investors to put their money into these exact types of hard assets. It requires a little bit more digging than just logging into your Robinhood app and buying an S&P 500 ETF, but the upside over the next 10 years is drastically different. But let's step back for a second, because I don't want to just talk about real estate. The macro shift is so much bigger than just property. The second major piece of this wealth opportunity is something that is incredibly uncomfortable for a lot of good, progressive-minded Americans to admit, but we have to look at the data objectively. For the last decade or so, the dominant narrative in American finance and politics has been around deglobalization, ESG investing, which stands for environmental, social, and governance, and basically moving away from traditional energy sources like oil and gas as fast as humanly possible. And listen, I'm not here to debate the ethics of climate change or whether green energy is good or bad. That's a totally different conversation. What I am here to talk about is basic supply and demand. Over the last 10 years, because of political pressure and ESG mandates, Wall Street essentially stopped funding new oil drilling, new natural gas pipelines, and new refineries. At the exact same time, the world's population is growing, and we are trying to transition everything to electricity, which, by the way, requires massive amounts of copper, lithium, and cobalt to build, and massive amounts of natural gas and coal to actually generate the electricity to charge all these new batteries. So what did we do? We kneecapped the supply of traditional energy, while the global demand for energy is actually going up. It is a mathematical recipe for a massive energy crunch. And honestly, we're already seeing the early signs of it. Electricity grids in Texas and California are straining under the summer heat. Utility bills are creeping up. Here's the wealth opportunity. When an essential commodity becomes scarce, the people who own the means of production get incredibly wealthy. We are entering a decade where energy, specifically reliable, baseload energy, is going to be the most precious resource on the planet. I'm talking about uranium for nuclear power, which is quietly having a massive renaissance right now because governments are realizing wind and solar alone can't keep the lights on 24/7. I'm talking about natural gas, which is the cleanest of the fossil fuels and is absolutely essential as a bridge fuel for the next 20 years. I'm talking about the copper mines and the critical minerals needed for the electrical grid. If you take even a small portion of your portfolio and position it in the energy and infrastructure sector, specifically the companies that are actually producing the physical materials the world needs to function, you are essentially placing a bet on human necessity. And over a 10-year time horizon, human necessity rarely loses. I was reading a report the other day from a really brilliant macroeconomist, and he used a phrase that just stuck in my head. He said, "We are moving from an era of financial engineering to an era of physical reality." And I think that is the most profound way to summarize the next decade. For the last 15 years, you could get rich just by moving numbers around on a screen. You could buy a software company, you could buy crypto, you could buy meme stocks. We were optimizing the digital world. But the physical world, the real world of concrete, steel, copper, dirt, and energy, was completely neglected. We stopped building things in America. We stopped maintaining our infrastructure. We stopped drilling. We stopped building pipelines. And now, the physical world is demanding to be paid attention to. The pipes are leaking. The power grids are failing. The bridges are crumbling. And whoever steps up to fix, produce, or own those physical assets over the next 10 years is going to make an absolute fortune, because the supply of those assets is incredibly constrained, and the demand is literally keeping civilization running. This brings me to the third, and perhaps most important, piece of the puzzle. And this is the one that hits closest to home for regular people like you and me. It's about the destruction of the traditional job market and the renaissance of high-skill labor. We all know that AI is a thing now. ChatGPT hit the scene, and suddenly, millions of people who thought their desk jobs were safe realized that a computer program can write a marketing email, summarize a legal document, or write basic code in about 3 seconds. And this is terrifying to a lot of people. They see AI coming for their jobs, and they think, well, if a robot can do what I do, I'm worthless. But let's look at the actual reality on the ground. Go try to find a good plumber. Go try to find an electrician who will actually show up to your house. Go try to find a welder, a machinist, or an HVAC technician. You can't. They are booked out for months. And their rates are going through the roof. Why? Because for 30 years, our society told every high school kid that the only path to success was to go to a 4-year university, get a degree in business communications or psychology, and sit in a cubicle. We completely gutted the vocational training programs in our high schools. We stigmatized trade work. We told an entire generation of young men and women that working with your hands was somehow a failure. Meanwhile, the guys who ignored that advice, the guys who went to trade school or started an apprenticeship, who got their hands dirty, they are quietly killing it right now. They have zero student loan debt. They have a skill that cannot be outsourced to India. And a computer algorithm cannot fix a broken air conditioner in the middle of July. It requires a human being to drive a van to a physical location and use their brain and hands to solve a problem. Over the next decade, as AI eats away at the middle of the corporate ladder, all those middle management paper pushers, the data entry people, the basic analysts, the value of physical, localized labor is going to skyrocket. We are going to see a massive wage compression where the guy who fixes your toilet makes significantly more money than the guy sitting in an office analyzing spreadsheets, because the spreadsheet guy is now competing with a robot that works for free. So, what's the actionable advice here? If you are 20 years old, or even if you're 40 years old and you're stuck in a dead-end corporate job that you can feel slowly being automated away, the biggest wealth opportunity of the decade might not be found in the stock market. It might be found in acquiring a tangible, physical skill. And even if you don't want to change careers, you can invest in this trend. There are companies that manufacture the tools these tradespeople need. There are companies that provide the software for HVAC dispatch and plumbing businesses. There are publicly traded staffing companies that specialize in industrial labor. You can own a piece of the blue-collar renaissance without ever picking up a wrench. But you have to see the shift happening. You have to realize that the premium on knowledge work is dropping, while the premium on physical reality work is exploding. I want to take a quick detour here, just to share a personal thought, because I think it matters. I was at a dinner party a few months ago, and I was sitting next to a guy who worked in middle management at a big insurance company. Very nice guy. And he was complaining about how his bonus was cut this year, and how the company was implementing all these AI tools to streamline his department. He was genuinely anxious about being laid off in his late 40s. And right across the table from us was a guy who owned a local landscaping and hardscaping business. And the business owner was talking about how he had to buy 3 new trucks this year because demand was so high, and how he was paying his foreman $90,000 a year because he couldn't find enough skilled people to lay pavers and build retaining walls. It was this bizarre, quiet moment of social inversion. The guy with the master's degree was terrified about the future. The guy with dirt under his fingernails was planning his next expansion. And it just struck me how badly the cultural narrative has failed us. We were sold a bill of goods. We were told that the future was entirely digital, and that if we weren't sitting at a desk typing on a keyboard, we were obsolete. But the physical world doesn't care about our cultural narratives. The physical world just needs things built, fixed, and maintained. And the people who can do that are holding all the cards right now. Okay, let's pull back and look at the fourth piece of this puzzle, because there's another side to the wealth equation that we have to talk about, and it's a little darker, but it's crucial. It's the reality of the national debt and what it means for your savings. The United States government is currently in debt to the tune of $34 trillion. Let me just let that number sit there for a second. It is a number so large that the human brain literally cannot comprehend it. It's not just a big number, it is a structural impossibility. The government cannot pay this back. They are never going to pay this back. And here's the dirty little secret that politicians don't want to say out loud on CNN or Fox News. The only way out of a debt trap this massive is to inflate the currency. They have to make the dollars you hold worth less so that the debt they owe becomes relatively smaller. It is a hidden tax on every single American who holds cash in a checking or savings account. If you have $100,000 sitting in a bank account right now earning 4% interest, but real inflation is running at 6 or 7%, you are not making money. You are slowly, silently being robbed. You are losing purchasing power every single day, and the government is using that lost purchasing power to pay off their creditors. It is a slow-motion wealth transfer from the savers to the debtors. So, if you know that the people in charge of the system are going to systematically devalue the currency over the next decade to manage their debt, how do you protect yourself? You don't fight it. You don't bury your money in the backyard. You position yourself on the right side of the trade. You have to own things that the government cannot print. They can print dollars. They cannot print a house. They cannot print an acre of farmland. They cannot print a barrel of oil. They cannot print a share of a highly profitable, irreplaceable company that raises its prices alongside inflation. This is why the traditional advice of just save up 6 months of emergency cash and put the rest in a savings account is financial malpractice in this environment. Cash is not king in a high-debt, high-inflation world. Cash is a melting ice cube. Your wealth opportunity over the next decade is to take that melting ice cube and pour it into molds that will freeze into solid assets before the purchasing power evaporates. And look, I get it. This all sounds a little overwhelming. It sounds like you have to become a day trader or a real estate mogul to survive. But that's the beautiful irony of this situation. You don't. In fact, the biggest trap people fall into right now is doing too much. The financial media wants you to believe that you need to be constantly trading, constantly checking your phone, constantly reacting to the latest Fed meeting or the latest jobs report. They want you anxious and clicking. But the people who are going to capture this decade's wealth opportunity are the ones who do the exact opposite. They do the hard, boring work up front. They take a weekend to really understand the shift from financial assets to hard assets. They look at their portfolio and they say, okay, I'm overexposed to tech stocks that rely on cheap money, and I'm underexposed to energy, infrastructure, and tangible assets. They make a few calculated adjustments. And then they close the laptop. Wealth building in a volatile, transitioning decade isn't about speed. It's about positioning. It's like surfing. You don't paddle frantically the whole time. You paddle hard to get to the right spot in the ocean, you find your position on the board, and then you wait. You wait for the wave. And when the macroeconomic wave comes, when the energy crunch hits its peak, when the housing shortage forces rents to skyrocket, when the reality of the debt forces a massive repricing of hard assets, you just have to be standing on the right board in the right place. The wave does the work. Let me give you a very simple, actionable breakdown of how to apply this to your life today, whether you have $1,000 or $100,000 or $1 million. First, audit your delusions. Sit down and look at where your money is. If it's all in cash, or if it's all in one sector of the stock market because that's what your buddy told you to do in 2021, you are not positioned for the next decade. You are positioned for the last one. Second, start diversifying into the physical world. This doesn't mean you have to buy a physical gold bar and hide it under your mattress. It means looking at infrastructure funds. It means looking at REITs that focus on data centers or industrial warehouses. It means looking at companies that produce the copper, the steel, and the energy that the real world runs on. Make your portfolio look a little more like the physical world and a little less like an app store. Third, and this is the most underrated advice on the internet, invest in your own physical resilience. The next decade is going to be bumpy. There are going to be supply chain shocks. There are going to be localized power grid failures. There are going to be economic layoffs. Having a skill that allows you to produce value in the real world, not just on a screen, is the ultimate wealth shield. If you can cook, if you can fix a car, if you can do basic carpentry, if you can grow food, even as a hobby, you are insulating yourself against the chaos of a system that is transitioning painfully from the digital fantasy back to physical reality. Fourth, stop trying to time the bottom. People are sitting on the sidelines right now waiting for housing prices to crash 30% so they can finally buy a home. I'm going to be honest with you, that crash might not happen the way you think it will. Because the government is not going to let the housing market collapse. They will print more money, they will lower rates, they will manipulate the system to keep the facade going, because housing is the only asset most Americans have. If housing crashes, the consumer economy dies. So instead of waiting for a magical crash that may never come, figure out how to lock down your shelter. Even if it means buying a smaller place, or buying a duplex and renting out the other side to offset your costs. Get into the game of owning hard assets, even if you have to start incredibly small. You know, it's funny. When I started really digging into all of this, when I finally pulled my head out of the sand and stopped listening to the talking heads on TV and actually looked at the mechanics of where the money is flowing, I felt a strange mix of emotions. On one hand, I was a little angry. I felt like the rules of the game had been changed in the middle of the match, and nobody bothered to send out a memo. It felt unfair that the people who played by the rules, saved their cash, worked their desk jobs, trusted the system, were the ones getting squeezed the hardest. But on the other hand, I felt this incredible sense of clarity. Because once you see the matrix for what it is, once you understand that we are in a massive generational transition from a fake, financialized economy back to a real, physical economy, you realize that the playing field is actually being leveled in a weird way. You don't need to be a Wall Street insider to see that energy is going to be more valuable in 10 years. You don't need a PhD in economics to see that we have a massive housing shortage and the population is growing. You don't need to be a tech genius to see that a plumber who can fix a pipe will always have a job, even if an AI can write a poem. The opportunities are hiding in plain sight. They are right there in the physical world around you. They are in the dirt, in the pipes, in the power lines, and in the roofs over our heads. The next decade is going to be a crucible. It's going to melt down a lot of the false illusions we've built up over the last 20 years about what wealth is and how you get it. The people who cling to the old ways, who keep their money in cash, who keep betting on purely digital trends, who keep ignoring the physical realities of the world, are going to come out the other side feeling poorer, more exhausted, and deeply confused. But you don't have to be one of them. You have the advantage of seeing the shift before it fully completes. You have the advantage of understanding why things feel so tight right now, and where the pressure is actually building. Take a deep breath. Look at your finances not with anxiety, but with a fresh set of eyes. Ask yourself, is my wealth built on a promise, or is it built on something real? Start making the small, quiet shifts today. Move a little bit of your money into the tangible world. Look at your career and ask if it's resilient to the changes coming. Read one book about macroeconomics or energy markets. Just start. Because the decade is coming whether we're ready or not. The wave is forming out there in the ocean. All you have to do is make sure you're standing on the right board when it rolls in.